Texas Department of Information Resources Chief Procurement Officer. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We know everybody's busy responding to the COVID-19 disaster, both on a professional and personal level. Our intent for this session is to give you information about tools and other resources available to you that will help you continue business operations in this remote teleworking state. Many may prove to be useful even after we get back to our more normal operations. Before I get started, I wanted to address our contingency plan in the case we experience technical difficulties. One of the challenges with many organizations working remotely is the extra load on the network, which causes connections to drop or even busy or all circuits busy messages when attempting to place phone calls. So in the event this webinar is interrupted, we'll use an audio conference bridge as a backup, and you can follow along with the slides that we sent you via email, and those went to all registered webinar attendees. We also included the dial-in information in that email, and I'll share that information with you now if you want to capture it. So to join the audio conference bridge as a participant, you dial the following number, 877-336-1829. And I'll repeat that, 877-336-1829. When prompted, type in the access code 3851754. Again, 3851754, followed by the pound key, and then at the prompt, press the pound key again to join as a participant. And again, this is just in the event that there are technical issues. Also in that email were a couple of attachments. One of them I referenced, that's the presentation, and there's a second attachment there with respect to a lot of the information that we'll be talking about. So I'll pause now and give Tony an opportunity to give you information about how best to submit your questions throughout this webinar.
Hi, this is Tony Tran. If we can we get a raise of hands if audio levels are fine? If you go into your panel, you should be able to raise your hand as an attendee. And please let me know if audio is looking okay. Okay, I'm seeing a few hands. I think we're good to go. Throughout this presentation, you can submit any of your questions through GoToWebinar. There should be a questions pane. Go ahead and submit it there. We will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. If you have questions regarding the GoToWebinar, any technical questions, go ahead and send them there as well, and I will work with you one-on-one. And at the end of the presentation, we will go through the questions and answer those. But I think with that, I will pass it back off to Herschel.
Thank you, Tony. And if we can advance to the next slide. So we've pretty much covered the welcome. We'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. So in terms of the speakers today, again, I'm Herschel Becker, Chief Procurement Officer. I'm going to kick this off and then turn it over to John Hoffman, our Chief Technology Officer. Following John is Joy Hall Bryant. She is the Program Director for IRM Outreach, and Joy can tell you what IRM stands for. And then we'll close with Colleen Berkeley, Director of Procurement Services. The impetus for this conference call or webinar was really started with emails that I was seeing in the TXPA, TXPPA email distribution with respect to how do we, and then fill in the blank, related to procurement. How do we host pre-bid sessions? How do we receive electronic responses? How do we conduct vendor meetings, et cetera? So we're going to hear generally from John and Joy about these products and services that are available. Colleen will bring it home for those procurement professionals to talk about how DIR uses these types of tools in maintaining procurement operations. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Hoffman. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Hoffman. I am Chief Technology Officer for DIR. Thank you all so much for joining us. First, I wanted to start overall with the DIR offerings. And if you look, this is a screenshot of DIR's opening page. Certainly all of the different array of IT-related services and products that DIR has. There's across the banners there at the top. And this is for entities and public sector across the state to take advantage of. But what we wanted to do, because the portfolio is so large and there were specific questions that were coming to us, specifically around the COVID-19 preparedness and response, we wanted to put a particular page together that just enabled a quick and efficient way for people to link to the more common contract features that we've got. So if you click on the banner there, the COVID-19, it'll take you to, and I've got a screenshot of what the next page will look like. Hit that. Thank you. What this does is it opens up around cooperative contracts for remote access. And this is a large page, and it's got all kinds of information around security and best practices. Some of these we'll go into more deeply, but what I was asked to go through is really understanding of the cooperative contracts that provide insight to the different teleconferencing, video conferencing, different learning, training services, and so forth that different entities can leverage as we move to a remote workforce and the way that we are doing business is changing. And so if you would click on the cooperative contracts remote access link, I've got another screenshot that we did. Note it says last updated 3/16 on that, but we certainly have updated it since then. That was as we prepared this presentation. And we're doing daily updates. This is a spreadsheet, and we did it as a spreadsheet just so that we could keep it current. Different vendors are providing insights and opportunities for the different customers. And so we put this page together, and it's broken into the different headers, as I mentioned earlier, conferencing services, and those tend to be through different providers. Conferencing software tend to be different applications, WebEx, Skype, those types of things, as well as other conferencing, classroom, things like that. And each one of these has a link and a contract link that you can see to the right. We go through the different services as well. You may not think about it, but there may be different programs or wireless or wired offerings that your entities may be needing. So we have those, security services, remote learning. And while there are certain vendor names that are associated with each of these categories, by no means is that the limit of them. Many of these have dozens upon dozens of different contracts that are associated, and if you click on then the all, whatever it is, be DIR conferencing solution or the all conferencing software, that opens up essentially the search. So what we've done is we went ahead and pushed it so that you didn't have to figure out how to do the search and such. It automatically comes up. But for each one of these different contract links, there's a whole host of information behind it. And so I just took the top one there, the AT&T contract link, and it has a big long there in the blue. It ends in 4270. And if we go to the next slide, what it does is this is a screenshot of what gets pulled up there. This screenshot certainly has a lot of information with a lot of different links to it. It certainly has the contact information at AT&T as well as with DIR. It's got an overview down below this. It was too much to all get on one screenshot, but it gets into all the different contract language, specifics with different products and pricing sheets and all that information, which will be right at your fingertips. It also has, and it's something that I wanted to point out, oftentimes people don't realize it, with our contracts, each vendor is required to put together a website that is specifically tailored for the DIR cooperative contract environment. And so right there in the middle, you'll see URL where it says vendor website underlined and there's a link. And we'll go to the next screenshot there. And this actually then is a link that AT&T keeps updated. It provides an overview of all the different service offerings. It's a lot of the same information you see on the earlier page, but it's maybe organized different things that the vendor may be particularly offering, or response to COVID or things like that could be added in depending upon the vendor. This goes into more detail on specifically how to purchase and contacts, as well as key links for different product sets that they have. And so this is what I hope to gain is a sense of, for you all to understand, we've got a lot of different contract solutions out there. We focused what we believe are probably the highlight of COVID-19 response and for remote access. There's a website for that, or an Excel page for that. Each of those different Excel links, either it's a search engine or it goes to specific contracts. Hopefully this helps navigate the different cooperative contracts that are available for remote access. One of the other things, if we'll hit the next page, one of the other things that we certainly put a lot of focus on is cybersecurity hygiene. And along with the link for the remote access, we do encourage all Texans to remain vigilant and practice the good cyber hygiene. Now is the time when the bad actors actually tend to want to target because there are different opportunities that are out there. We've got several different hygiene practice links that are on the web page. Certainly those tie to some of the most common ones are Assure, your own network, your network at home, how you are using that, be diligent in what links you are clicking. We put on here, there was actually a map theme used to disguise a malicious website, and it looked like it was an update to what the COVID-19 spread was. And it did show that information, but behind the scenes, it actually then puts malware onto the PC and is going to be a threat to that entity. So everyone must be diligent. There's other best practices as well, as far as ensuring that you've got passwords and a lot of other awareness of who may be around you, especially if you're using other unusual spaces. You may be in a home or something that you don't realize people may be listening, and that information. And then the final is keep in mind, although it's a PC and it may be the one that's connected, it is for work purposes. We certainly don't want personal folks using the work PCs, laptops for non-work related items, as that can introduce new threats and risks. So that's what I was going to cover today. I know that I mentioned some of these cyber hygiene practices. Having a web conference is not as easy as it looks, and Joy Hall Bryant is a master from years of experience, and so I'd like Joy to go through and talk a little bit about what it is that she sees as best practices.
Well, that might be a little bit overstating, but since John is my boss's boss, we'll go with that. So hi, I'm Joy Hall Bryant with DIR. In my role, I do a lot about facilitating collaboration. Among other things, I serve as the team lead for DIR's webinar licenses and discussion lists, and I host events both in person and virtual. I'm not necessarily an expert in all things virtual, but I'm happy to share a few tips. Now note, in this session, we will occasionally mention a product name. We are not advocating for any particular product, it's merely examples. So let's start with the basics. Anyone who has ever made a phone call has hosted a virtual meeting. This is nothing new. However, there are a myriad of types and circumstances, and the first step is always planning. Assess what types of meeting are going to be held. What are the purposes? How many might be attending? Who is the audience? How formal are these meetings that you need to conduct? Those factors are going to dictate the rest. Then you want to consider, what tools do you already have? This should be part of the general planning. We're not talking about a specific meeting yet. So at a minimum, you have phones. You can do quite a bit with phones. Do you have collaboration tools like Teams and Skype? Do you have webinar software? Do you have conference room with VTC, video conferencing equipment in it? What do you have? What can you get? What do you need? And also consider what support your IT department can provide. That's going to be very important. And don't forget to plan for accessibility compliance. That's critical. So help employees understand the cost. They don't need to know every little detail, but for instance, I have access to a webinar tool which DIR pays a flat fee for. I also have access to one where DIR is charged per minute per user. There's no reason for me to use a tool where we get charged that much when I can do one that's basically for free because we've already paid our cost. So help them, make sure they understand those things. So assemble whatever the resources are you're going to need in advance so that you're prepared, be that microphones, conference bridges in conference rooms, headsets, cables, webcams, whatever you think you might need. Try to assemble as much as you can in advance. And then staff need to start learning the tools, not the day before the big meeting, but as a regular part of doing business. Don't wait until it's urgent. Use the tools when there's no risk. Get comfortable, get proficient. For example, on my immediate team, we only have 5 members, but we hold some of our staff meetings via Teams meeting, even when we're all in the same building, not because we need to, but because we need to start learning how to use that tool. It's relatively new to us. So how formal is the meeting? Holding a staff meeting is far different than holding a board meeting or a town council meeting, where the formality and even legalities become important. The more formal the meeting, the more official it is, the more effort's going to be required. Great, thank you. Meetings fall on a continuum. This is my perspective. I mean, they vary from the why bother to the, oh my goodness, we need to pay someone to do this. The more formal, the more effort. Really, I think that where you're going to fall most of the time is somewhere between good enough and showing some polish, adding some bells and whistles. You may end up on the extremes, but that's where you're going to fall most of the time. Video is big now. Think about whether you're going to use video. Viewers like to put a face with a name and a voice. Body language can be important. On the other hand, talking head can just be annoying. So maybe you only want to put speaker photos on the slide deck and not worry about video. Now that's in normal circumstances. Right now, you're trying to keep bandwidth to a minimum. And so most people are not using video in order to save bandwidth. So I think we're ready for the next slide. So you've done your advanced planning. Now you're thinking about the specific meeting. You want to build in attendee interaction. There may well be meetings or times when you're basically broadcasting information and there's very little attendee interaction, and that's fine. But most of the time you want to address how much interaction do we need and how can we use that? Do we need voice? If we're going to have voice, how are you going to control who talks when so that they're not talking over one another? Are you going to do a roll call? Maybe use a feature on your tool with a raise hand and then the facilitator calls on them. Do you have formal Q&A like we are in this webinar tool? Informal text chat, polls, embedded features like raise hand, faster, go slower, thumbs up, those type of things. Do you want to use external tools? I think that my colleague's going to mention that a bit because they use Mentimeter, but that's kind of fun, maybe an added complexity, but you can use external tools that add some bells and whistles. On the pre-meeting tasks, you're ready to be setting up this meeting. You want to assign roles. Rarely do you have a presenter who can do it all. They can present, they can manage the slides, and they can run the meeting. That's extremely difficult. Just let your presenter present. Other people need to take on the other roles. So you may have a facilitator, an administrator, somebody monitoring the questions. It might be one other person, it might be a team of people, but you want to assign those in advance. You want to prepare an agenda and meeting materials and share those in advance with your participants. And you want to conduct a practice run, ideally with the exact same environment, the same equipment, the same room, the same people. It may range from, oh, let's just get online for 10 minutes and test the equipment, make sure everyone is comfortable, to it might be a full-blown dress rehearsal where you present the entire thing. I've even seen where people do a dress rehearsal very strictly as if they were presenting it, and they record that one just in case the real one goes wrong and they meant to make a recording. They've actually got two options. And you may also want to consider contingency plans, especially in this environment. So think about that. I think we're ready for the next one. So then during the meeting, running the meeting, some of the things you want to consider: start on time. Be aware of people's time. People enjoy it when you start on time and don't delay. State the purpose, any ground rules, how participants are going to interact. There are many ways to interact. Tell them in advance what their options are. Utilize the agenda and stay on track. Self-identify before speaking if you're not using video. It's confusing when you have a lot of speakers who is speaking at any given moment. Verbally communicate what should be showing on screen, just in case it's not what you expected, especially if you're moving around. If you're showing a desktop, you're showing a slide, you're going out to the internet. So give some verbal cues, or if there's a delay, leverage interactivity features to engage the audience. We talked about this a little bit on the previous slide. There are a lot of options planned through for this particular meeting, what you want to use. And provide a solid summary at the end, including action items. This is actually my favorite newish tip, and it's particularly good if you're having committee meetings, if you're having staff meetings or some sort of work meeting. If you really make an effort to do a solid summary at the end, like a 5-minute summary, and you're doing a recording for the attendees who couldn't be there, then you can mark that timestamp and tell your work group, okay, here's the meeting, it was an hour long, here's the recording. By the way, the summary is at timestamp X. If you just want to review that, then you can decide what parts of the meeting you want to go back to. I think that is an excellent, excellent tip. So after the meeting, you want, apparently I have a bullet in the wrong place. Plan the meeting flow, the level of formality, if it will be recorded. This actually should have been in the earlier section. I went to make an edit and put it in the wrong place. But that is something you want to think about. What is the flow? When are you taking questions? How formal is it? Are you going to record it? What are you going to do with that recording? So Tracy, if we could fix the deck before we send out another version. Sorry about that typo. But then after the meeting, if it's appropriate, ask for attendee feedback. That might be because it's an educational session and you're doing that kind of feedback, or it might be feedback about, well, how did the meeting go? Did you get the information you needed? So if it's appropriate, ask your attendees for feedback. Share whatever materials you promised, be that files, minutes, recording. Evaluate, have a debrief with your team and evaluate what went well, what might be improved. Learn from every meeting that you conduct. I think we're ready for the next one. Now, we could do an entire day, we could do a half a day on nothing but tips and tricks. I'll just do a few. So key equipment should be plugged in. Don't rely on battery power when you're a key presenter or a key administrator on this. Plug in. Use a wired connection if possible. It's just additional safeguards. Turn off webcams if bandwidth seems to be an issue. Audio over phone may be more stable in some cases. If you're using a technology solution, subscribe to the service alerts. Your products like Zoom and GoToWebinar, they have active service alerts. You should be subscribed to those and you should be monitoring them the day before your meeting, the day of your meeting, so that you go in knowing if there are any reported problems. Headsets with mics make for clearer audio than a webcam mic, although I have to say they're getting better. But when you do use a microphone, go ahead and read the manual or look for some instructions. You don't have to become a sound engineer, but the few little tips on where to put the microphone boom can be really helpful. Let the presenters focus on presenting. It's very hard to juggle the role of speaking and running the meeting. Have other staff that administer the meeting. For presenters, consider the options and consider the optics. Some things are very informal. It's just your team, it doesn't matter. Others really do, and then others are kind of in the middle. I try to lean towards the more professional. I was on a webinar as an attendee last week with 800 people. The originator of it, who has a staff, was almost like he was producing from a TV studio. He had sort of an anchor desk. There were no wires you could see. It was good lighting. He had a virtual background with his company logo. There were about 12 presenters that they cut to, everybody working from home pretty much. It was really interesting. About half of them were literally using their webcam camera, which usually they were working on that laptop. So it was at a weird angle where a third of what you saw was ceiling lights. One guy had his ceiling fan on directly over his head where it looked like a giant propeller hat. Another person was sitting with a window behind him, and so the light made it where he was just basically a silhouette. Another person was obviously working from their bedroom with the bed in the background. I'm just thinking if I was on a webinar projecting to 800 people, I'd at least turn my laptop around where maybe the wall was my background. A lot of these tools have options for adding virtual background or adding, maybe you put a folding screen behind you or you blur the background. So there are options if you're using video. You could always just do a photo instead. The next one, I think this last slide. So resources. As I said, I think I mentioned this before, most of the tools like Zoom and GoToWebinar, they have extensive support libraries. They have videos, they have training tutorials, quick start guides, things you can print. Don't reinvent the wheel. See what they've already created for you, because anything you design, that's fine, and there may be reasons to do that, but you're going to have to do it again with the next version, and these things are always releasing new versions. So if you can use their materials, use them. DIR has posted a how-to guide for governing bodies convening in a virtual forum. This is a very official document. There's been a lot of research on it. Definitely check that out. It is on the main website, the COVID-19 website. There is a work group within Texas state agencies called the SAC Training and Development Subcommittee. That group tries to share information about training and resources, and they took it on as a project and created a repository where public sector staff can just share references. So you can definitely take advantage of that. You can contribute to it. It's just a very simple online form and then a view of the repository. So we're asking for quality versus quantity. If you know of a quick start guide or a best tips or a good video that has to do with virtual meetings, webinars, even telework, we'd be glad to have that. You can definitely search. The only problem with searching is it's a little overwhelming because you get so many results back, but definitely use your common search terms, digital meeting, webinar, best practices for remote engagement, those kind of things, and see what you get back. And you would expect to visit websites, but also check images. You're going to get an amazing amount of resources when you choose images. Now, please be respectful of ownership, don't violate copyright, but if nothing else, they can serve as inspiration pieces. So I think that is the end of my topic, but I'll be happy to address questions during the Q&A segment.
Hi, this is Colleen Berkeley. I'm going to talk to you about how DIR uses these different webinar tools to do procurements and transition activities. Next slide. So really, in order to make these tools effective and to keep your operations running as normal, you have got to establish guidelines. You need to establish someone as the leader for whatever meeting it is that you are having. Even if that leader never says a word, they're the one who is in charge of organizing and making sure the team stays organized. Make sure that you orchestrate handoffs and clearly signal when they are happening. You could tell as we prepared to wind down our slides, the next person was ready to go because we did organize those handoffs and we let the audience know that the speaker was about to change. You can do that via verbal communication or also with just a slide insert. If you're commenting, announce yourself. So if you're in a meeting and you're participating in the meeting, but you're not necessarily a presenter, but you want to provide feedback, make sure you say, this is so-and-so, and then provide your feedback. And make that a guideline that you have your audience stick to if it's a verbal meeting. Not everybody recognizes everybody else's voice, and it's really important that we all know who we are talking to. Stay on topic. We have done a lot of meetings, virtual meetings over the last week, and it is really easy in a virtual setting for some reason to let those conversations go from the formal topic-based focus to a more informal conversation amongst participants. And it takes a lot more time to get through content. Make sure whoever you have established as the leader for that meeting helps wrangle everyone so that we're all back on topic as quickly as possible. If you are on a conference call and you have both PCs and phones going at the same time, make sure everybody mutes their PCs. We get a lot of different alerts that come through, and that noise, that ding, that happy sound that plays can be very distracting in an open meeting like this. If you're using a chat program for internal communications, use it in moderation. This is something that we saw in our transition meetings. We are conducting transitions for our data center services program virtually. All last week, all of our meetings happened with everybody in different remote locations. And we discovered that while we had a meeting bridge, such as this GoToWebinar, we also had an external chat tool that we were using so that we could communicate quickly without disrupting the audience. If you are doing that, make sure you are doing it judiciously and only when it needs to happen. Because as you are focusing on typing, you are missing the conversation that is going on around you. Most importantly, be patient, especially right now, as everybody is learning to adjust to these changes in infrastructure needs. Tools do not always work the way you want them to work. People are not always all comfortable with the technology that you are using. Remind yourself, remind your staff to be patient as you're working through these different technologies that you're trying out. Next slide, Tracy. So some of the audio and video tools that we have been using at DIR are listed here. We're using GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar right now. We have been using Zoom, Skype, and Microsoft Teams. These are just the ones that we have tried out and we have some level of expertise in. As we've mentioned earlier in this webinar, there are countless other tools that your agency may want to try. Regardless of what you try, always have a backup audio or dial-in option. Herschel mentioned that at the beginning of this webinar. You never know what the bandwidth is going to be or the capabilities of the tools, especially at peak usage times like we are at right now. And also consider adding a chat tool or chat functionality. Most of the tools that I have listed here on this slide do have an internal chat feature that you can use and decide whether or not you're going to display to the entire audience, or if you have you want to keep those internal so that you have a series of organizers or panelists that are the only ones that will be able to see those chat tools. Regardless of what you decide to use, make sure you try it out before you go live with a meeting. Next one. So I just mentioned this. Consider when you are scheduling your meetings, the time of day and the network traffic. We are seeing right now that earlier in the day tends to be better. The network usage tends to peak between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., which means you're going to get more busy signals and more participants unable to join your virtual meeting. Make sure that you do review the ground rules at the beginning of every meeting. Not everyone who attends is going to understand your particular set of ground rules, and it's really important for the success of the meeting that everyone be on the same page. Remote meetings can be exhausting. By the end of the day, when I've had 6 or 7 meetings, virtual meetings, by the end of that day, I am wiped mentally because it takes so much more to focus when you're not in the room with another group of people and you're interacting. So be mindful of that and make sure that you take frequent breaks. When we're doing a full day webinar, and we have done those over the past week, we try to break every hour on the hour. When we come back online, we remind everyone where we are in the agenda. We remind everyone briefly of the ground rules, and then we get started again. This really does help to keep those meetings on target as you're going through. Next slide, please. So what do? We use webinars for pre-solicitation conferences. We find them to be a very effective method of communicating. They have a record capability so that we can share those for participants who were unable to participate at the time of the webinar. And we're able to really convey a lot of material. When necessary, we also use secondary tools. I gave an example of Mentimeter and Wufoo. These tools do allow participants to remain anonymous. For a procurement process, it's really important that you not have questions attributable to a specific vendor in a live event. A lot of times that becomes a barrier for the vendors to participate because they're afraid of embarrassing themselves or tipping their hand in one way or another. Wufoo is a web-based form tool that we use when we are seeking input during a request for comment process. So we want to post draft solicitations out there to give those vendors who are interested the opportunity to provide us with feedback. But we also want to make sure that there's no perception that we have favored one vendor over another by taking that vendor's suggestions in favor of another respondent. Wufoo can make it an anonymous transmission. That's something that you should consider if you're looking for anonymity in your processes. We also find that you increase participation the more times that you open the door to allow the vendors insight or input into your process. It's very important in a competitive procurement situation. We have been hosting remote negotiation sessions. What we've been using is our internal Skype tool with an external webinar tool. And as I said, when we do all-day sessions, we do break every hour. It's really important, those breaks. Next slide, please. Look, I finished. One thing before I turn it over to Herschel is I want to say you can do everything virtually that you can do in person. You can do remote bid openings. You just have to make sure you have a webcam and you have someone in the audience that's comfortable with opening the bids in front of a live studio audience. You can accept bids electronically. We do have an internal tool that we use at DIR for electronic submissions, but you could do it via email. You just need to set up the correct protocols, work with your IT folks to make sure that you have the capacity to accept a bid as large as they could be. Make sure that you have a way for securely documenting those bids when they come in, and that make sure that they're not going to introduce viruses to your network. It's all possible. You just have to coordinate. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen and Joy and John. In a second, I'm going to turn it over to Tony to see where we are with questions, and he might encourage you to ask some additional questions. Just most immediately, I guess, to follow up on Colleen's point, the things that she's describing in terms of accepting electronic bids, those are things that can be certainly done technically. The vendors are accustomed to doing that. I think I did see traffic on the text email distribution list around the maybe especially counties' ability to receive electronic bids. I think I was reading that it would require the county a local rule to allow that. So maybe someone can type in a question/comment regarding counties' ability legally and maybe municipalities' ability to be able to do that. But certainly if you have the authority to do it, technically it's something that you're able to do. In terms of the questions, and again, I'll turn it over to Tony in just a second, but this is time that we made available for you. We'd like to be able to address any questions that you have. You can certainly submit questions after the webinar is over if you've had some time to digest it and generate some questions, but we'd like to pause for an opportunity for you to ask questions now. Those questions can be about our COVID-19 page, outreach communications. It can be about working remotely or conducting business remotely. It can be about best practices, or it could be specific to any particular tool. To the extent that we can answer that here, we'll do that. If you have specific questions that we're not able to answer, we'll certainly email the group with our answers later. But with that, I'll pause and turn it over to Tony to see if he wants to add anything.
This is Joy. While Tony's looking at questions, I'd like to add a comment, Herschel. So when it comes to cameras, as I said, I am not a proponent of video. I hate being on camera, but I recognize in normal circumstances, it is popular with a lot of people. And if you're going to do much virtual meeting where you're using camera, I highly recommend getting a separate camera. They aren't expensive. You can get webcams that are less than $100, but so many people use the ones embedded in their laptop, and that's fine for a lot of things, but you get the weird angles because you're trying to actually use the laptop while you project. If you're using two monitors, you're usually looking at the bigger monitor, and so the laptop is giving you a lovely view of the profile, and it looks like the person is never kind of looking at you in their eye. So I really prefer using an external web camera when I have to use one. Actually, I prefer using none. But if I have to use one, I do like an external one that's on a little bendable arm attached to my desk, and I can change the angles. Tony, I'll push it back to you. I don't know if any of the other panelists thought of questions or comments they wanted to inject.
Yeah, this is Tony Tran. We did have a question. It was regarding the webinar and whether it will be posted. Yes, we will be posting this webinar in the next few days.
Tony, this is Herschel. I'll go ahead and ask one, and maybe Joy or Indy could answer this. What are the limitations of these tools in terms of the number of users? And I'll add, especially given the network issues that we're seeing across the country.
Let me start on that one, Herschel. And definitely bandwidth in the current situation is a whole nother ball game there. But just in terms of the capacity, often these tools have different levels, and you get what you pay for. You want the plan that allows for 100, for 500, for 1,000. We at DIR happen to have GoToWebinar, which allows. We also have GoToMeeting. We don't use that very much. That's a more collaborative tool and caps out at 25, 26. But the GoToWebinar is up to 1,000 in the plan that we purchased. And let me also make a distinction. A lot of these words can be used simultaneously: remote meeting, webinar meeting. For us at DIR, we use the word webinar usually to mean that we need the administrative features of pre-registration. We need to be able to track attendees. We need formal Q&A where they can ask questions. There's a mechanism for handling them, not just chat that comes in like a ticker tape. So that's why we have GoToWebinar and why we have Zoom, because we can use Teams meeting for a regular collaborative meeting. I think on meeting, at least our plan, we're an Office 365 shop. And I think that Microsoft Teams meeting has a capacity of 250 on our plan, and I'm not sure about live event. That's more their broadcast tool, but it doesn't have pre-registration, which is something we need in some of our events. I think that our plan might have a cap of 1,000, but I've heard that it could have a cap as high as 10,000. And then something we haven't done at DIR yet, But we're kind of just starting to use Zoom. The plan that we bought, the meeting has a capacity of 300, and then the webinar add-on that we purchased has a capacity of 500. They have other levels, but some of these tools also have the capacity to stream live on YouTube or Twitter or Instagram. We haven't really explored that yet, but that of course expands your audience exponentially if you're using those kind of features. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Okay.
Tony, would you?
Yes, absolutely. Question come in. Do you know if the governor might suspend some of the competitive bid statutes during this virus attack, like having public bid openings and require governing board approval to go electronic? Herschel, if you can answer to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about governing board approval to go electronic. The governor did issue a declaration that allows, and I'm trying to get to it real quickly. So the words are, with respect to competitive bid statutes, to the extent that an enforcement of any state statute or administrative rule regarding contracting or procurement would impede any state agency's emergency response to protect life or property threatened by this declared disaster, he has authorized the suspension of such. And I say that because I know the majority of the people on this call are not state agency representatives, but we do have at least one, so I wanted to cover that. As it relates to state agencies, again, for the state agency folks on the phone, he has relaxed it. We, DIR, are working really hard to try to make offerings available with as easy of use as possible to procure those goods, including bulk purchase agreements for computers and things like that. So we have been working through that with certain state agencies. For the municipalities and the other customers that are on the phone, I have not heard to what extent the governor is waiving any of the local rules.
Okay.
Maybe
Go ahead.
Anybody out there on the call has heard of anything, feel free to submit via a question, any comments around that.
Let me go ahead and pass it to Joy. Joy wanted to make a comment.
I know that various people are on this call for different reasons. I think all of us are running virtual meetings right now, formal or not, but do pass this information on. I find that sharing and collaboration is critical right now. If you need help with best practices, ask other entities that you deal with. We all have different listservs, mailing lists, forums, what have you. Take advantage of those. Share what you've got. Ask others for help. We see that a lot on DIR's discussion lists. Certainly, you guys are welcome to join those. If you want to find them, just go to the DIR website, scroll to the bottom left and click Stay Connected. We have several different discussion lists, but sharing is critical. We all have to share information right now.
Hi, this is John Hoffman. I'll go ahead and take that lead in as an opportunity. Sharing is critical, and so is learning. I have mentioned earlier the cyber efforts that we all need to be diligent with. I'll reiterate, there are requirements for different entities, public sector, with House Bill 3834 to ensure that all the different individuals, employees, and some contractors are prepared to work in a secure environment. And certainly this COVID-19 may be an opportunity to reiterate that to those employees. It is in statute as far as the deadlines and such. DIR has got a lot of information on its website, enabling folks to be able to get different training sessions. And if you've got questions, please reach out to us. One of the last pieces of that program, and we've been working on this since October, to get these as a compliance issue. The last piece is the attestation of compliance, and DIR is positioning for that to go out in April. The deadline's in June, and so that'll give folks the last 30, 60 days there as they compile all of the different employees, contractors, and such who have taken this training. So it may be an opportunity as folks are working at home to take and remind around how important cyber health is.
Thank you, John. So we're not seeing any additional questions come in. We still have time to do that, so don't hesitate sending the questions. But I did want to cover a couple of sort of housekeeping things, and that is we'll make sure to make the change that Joy mentioned in her presentation, and we'll get the presentation sent out, certainly, to all the participants on this webinar. I will also send it separately to the TXPA email distribution, and I believe that Indy will try to get it to the Texas Municipal League for them to post or to distribute accordingly there. We've talked a lot about the tools that are available. I also wanted to mention the bulk purchase agreements. I alluded to that earlier, but just so the attendees know that if you go to the DIR website, you can find bulk purchase agreements that are out there. We certainly are working for bulk purchase agreements for computers. There is an absolute need by government entities to be able to secure laptops and other portable devices. Unfortunately, the demand is so high, the supply is limited. That said, we are working with vendors to come up with creative ways to offer those computers to our customers, including partnering with companies that happen to buy computers for themselves, and they're willing to offer them to state of Texas government entities to use just simply because they're sitting on the racks right now and they're only purchasing them to do replacement of existing devices. So they're making those available. We're doing that through subcontracting arrangements through our DIR contracts. But we have worked with Dell. We have a bulk purchase agreement out there with Dell for laptops and other types of devices. We are working with HP. Lenovo is coming very soon. We are trying to work with Apple to see if they're willing to step up to a bulk purchase agreement. And we're also working with SHI, who is maybe not a company that you would think of in terms of laptop and portable devices immediately, but they have an inventory that they're making available, and we have arranged to make that available to our customers, and it'll be hitting the website soon. We also have DocuSign. DocuSign is a tool that you can use to get electronic signatures as everybody's working remotely. And there's some enterprise content management offerings that are available there that you might consider for other projects that you're using. And beyond that, certainly DIR is here to help you with whatever you might need. As you can see on the slide there, if you have any questions at all, you can direct them to askdir@dir.texas.gov. And we're monitoring that email box constantly. And if we see questions come in for which we need to provide an immediate answer, we will do that.
Okay, thank you, Herschel. So far, we do not have any other questions from any of our organizers or panelists. If there's anything that you want to close out on, you can go ahead and ask right now.
Hi, this is Colleen. If there are any purchasing or procurement people on the phone and you're hesitant or you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. It's kind of scary going digital for the first time. So I am happy to help and answer the questions as well as I can.
Okay, last call. Anybody else from DIR have parting comments? Okay, hearing none, we value you all as customers, and we appreciate the time you took today. Again, reach out to us if you need additional information. Thank you.
Thank you.